Do you feel liberated yet? Donald Trump has just imposed, or yesterday has imposed, a blanket tariffs pretty much across the whole world, or pretty much across any nation or on any nation that it has been trading with. It has excluded some, which we might talk about, and the general attitude of that Trump has took, I think, speaks very loudly about the kind of place that unfortunately America is becoming, or at least White House is becoming. Welcome to the reality show. Today, it will be mostly me for the most part, but we should have somebody joining us for a bit in about in like the middle of a show. So that would be great. Somebody actually from America. Uh, but I wanna. There is a lot to discuss about the way this whole thing has been done, how many people from the Republican side are talking about this, how many people from the Trump's cabinet itself are talking about this, and yeah, generally the way it has been going. Uh, Obligatory. I have to say that my stocks have been crashing down like crazy. I think I'm about 6% down just today. But I generally want to make a point about this, about people who say, well, the stock market is crashing, but many people who say that are sort of omitting many of the other people who will suffer from this. Again, even if you take the smallest of the small caps companies that are publicly traded, you are still ignoring all the private companies, all the mom and pop shops, and all the basically small guys and individuals like me and you who do not have any sort of business or any sort of publicly traded business, but are buying things from abroad. This will probably be really bad, especially for me, who's living in Slovakia, who has a heavy export economy, mainly across other European nations, but also across the pond in America. So this will definitely not be fun. And I think this is the first thing to talk about, that there is really no reason to do it. Trump has literally no reason to do so. There is no justification for putting tariffs, which are again taxes for his own citizens, in this kind of way. America has not been sort of like struggling, and even if it has been struggling, more statism is not going to bring anything positive. It's going to inspire more downturn, more falling of the economy, more inflation, and eventually, more destruction. Somebody, I've seen an Onion article who I think made a real great headline saying, trying to quote Trump. Of course, Onion is a satirical website, but saying, these tariffs, this like recession is a very necessary step towards a depression, which talking about recession is already sort of faux pas, but talking about depression is pretty much unheard of. So we'll have to see where we'll go from this. We'll have to see how far Trump himself will take this. But the fact is that these tariffs will take place pretty soon, and there is no, at least we haven't heard any sort of any talking about that. Trump might get rid of this. There might be some deal. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, doesn't even know what's going on. We'll watch one video of that. Um, so let's go to the first part that I want to discuss. And it's this, and I truly mean this, fascistic attitude that Trump has been taking. The fact is, these tariffs are going because he said there is a national emergency. I need to do this. I need more power. I need to declare this national emergency so I can put in these tariffs because that's what we need to do. Now, the Congress has been trying to stop him. They actually, I believe, they passed through Senate a bill which would stop the Canadian, specifically the Canadian tariffs But of course, since he's the president, he can just shut it down. It was only able to pass because few Senate Republicans, has decided to join the Democrats, which is great to see, but is unfortunately not enough. It really does seem like Republicans are happy to sort of go with whatever Trump wants. And if Trump wants these tariffs to be put in place, that's what they'll do. So yeah, going back to the stock market, stock market might recover. We'll see how far this go. And it's important to remember that even if stock market sort of recovers from this, the damage has been done. The damage has been done permanently. It's not something you can just run away from. Global trade, global sort of unifying the global economies has been one of the greatest thing I think that has ever happened. The idea that we can trade around the world, we can specialize, we can have, we can use this idea of comparative advantage. We can use this idea of some nations are better for this, some nations are better for that. We don't have to grow bananas or grow whatever else in America. We can do it in places where it actually makes sense. Henrik says in the chat, Rand Paul was one of the creators of the bill against Trump's tariffs on Canada. Yeah, it was a bill co-sponsored by, as you said, Rand Paul and I believe Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine was, by the way, the the nominee with Hillary Clinton on vice president. I had no idea he's actually still in Senate. And I think few more, Mitch McConnell and two more Republicans have decided to join Democrats. So we'll see where that will also mean for sort of future work across the aisle, where you really really are getting into a much different sort of world. Uh, to continue with, I think Trump's fascistic attitude, I think, I, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think it was like 1 week ago where he said that, or he pretty much threatened, or he said, you know, car makers should not raise prices. These tariffs will raise prices. And for those people who, and I think I have one more video that will watch about that. The idea that tariffs would not raise prices is simply ridiculous. The purpose of tariffs is to raise prices. It's even when you say, we want the industry to come back, we want back the manufacturing jobs. Well, the way you do it is you increase the reason why manufacturing prices are not in America, or some of them, is because they've been outpriced. They've been, it has been easier to sort of import things rather than have them done domestically, have them done locally. So the only way to sort of change that is to put on tariffs, is to raise prices of imports on specific things, so you so-called bring it back. So let's watch one clip that I think is pretty interesting and talks about the general attitude that the cabinet is taking.
Plans for conversations or a trip to Beijing?
Nothing imminent.
When it comes to this negotiation, April 9th, these tariffs come in place. Do you plan on having negotiations before that date?
Again, I'm not part of the negotiations, so we'll see. I am sure that there are going to be a lot of calls. I just don't know if there are going to be negotiations.
The president had this huge chart showing all of the different rates. Canada and Mexico notably missing on that chart. Why is that?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Okay, I imagine that has to do potentially because they're already in negotiations previously with the 25%.
So this was Scott Bessent, everybody. He is the Secretary of Treasury. He's someone in charge, I think, specifically of these things, somebody who should know. And the idea that somebody like him would say, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I don't know if we are trying to talk to China, if we are trying to talk to people we are putting these tariffs on, or the imports from those countries. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why some countries are not there, why some countries are. What are you doing? What are you doing in Trump's cabinet where you don't know what's going on? And it really shows you the decline and you don't even have to make the both sides argument, the sort of general decline of the American society, or rather American sort of public representatives. I mean, just go back to the founding fathers. The idea that this guy Scott Besson is in the place that Alexander Hamilton was as a first Secretary of Treasury of George Washington's cabinet. That George Washington was someone in Trump's seat. Uh, I don't know what to even say about that. I mean, where do we even go from here? How can we even recover from that? How can we even recover from this sort of attitude, this sort of, I mean, generally, just sense of life? I mean, what kind of sense of life do these people have who don't know what's going on, who let one guy pretty much do whatever he wants? There is no accountability. There is no demands from his cabinet. Nobody is resigning. Nobody's going to resign, no matter what happens. No matter what happens, nobody will ever sort of hold Trump accountable. Republicans either. I mean, that much real credit to people like Rand Paul who do stand up and do stand up for, I think, even very sort of understandably selfish political reasons. I think when he was asked about it, he said the last time this kind of like huge tariffs have been imposed by the White House, and he was referring to Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, who that was during the, somebody can remind me in the chat, I cannot, Hoover administration. That after that, not only you got FDR for 4 terms, but basically you had democratic control of pretty much American politics for decades until Reagan sort of was able to somewhat bring it back. You had this complete takeover, and I think understandably, this will be destructive. This will be, people will suffer from it, and the next election is not in 4 years; it's in 2 years. And if this continues, if this kind of politics of Trump will continue for more, as well as if people start suffering the consequences of these actions, Democrats will, they might potentially win so hard in the midterms that they won't even care that Trump is in office. They, I mean, I might be exaggerating. Like getting veto-proof majority is, more recently pretty unheard of. But we haven't seen this amount of tariffs in pretty much ever in American history. We haven't seen this amount of tax increase at once pretty much ever in history of America. And again, tariffs are that I've seen different numbers about how much it is. I've seen 200 billion. I've seen half a trillion. I don't know what it might actually be, and not to mention you cannot know, you won't know. Especially tariffs are super hard to sort of predict how many of them you will be able to together. But this will really can potentially hand over a huge victory for Democrats in the upcoming midterms. And actually, joining me right now is Keith Weiner, an economist, as well as the founder and CEO of Monetary Metals. Hey, Keith.
Hey, Daniel, how are you?
Well, liberated, I guess. But Keith, yeah, from reality. Keith, what do you make of, I mean, what do you make, just your opening thoughts about what do you make of this whole thing?
It's an emotional response that, they're getting us, and therefore we have to get back at them. And it's nothing more than, an ego-driven, to use a rude word, pissing contest. That first of all is collectivism. It's a we and a them. So I always say, okay, you got to break it down and look at the individual. So there's an individual in Canada who's either prevented from buying dairy that's made in the U.S. because of the tax, or he has to pay more for it. Usually, those taxes are designed to make it, a strong disincentive. So he's not able to buy dairy, or he's paying way too much for it, and therefore, I, as an American now, am to be made to pay more or too much for Canadian-made lumber. So it doesn't really balance anything. It doesn't fix the problem that the Canadian can't buy the U.S. dairy. It's now just saying me, the American, can't buy, Canadian lumber, and it doesn't rectify anything. It just makes everything worse for everybody, and there's a general impoverishment as a result of this. We're going to be poorer, as well as obviously straining our relationship with a country that we've been friendly with for, 200 years, and now, all of a sudden, the two countries are. It's becoming nasty.
Yeah, and I made the whole point about even sort of the justification or the motivation behind this. Oftentimes the idea of this like great economic change is inspired by some sort of if you go to Hoover and the start the start of the Great Depression, it was this sort of need to do something drastic to fix it. But when it comes to what has been going in America, I cannot see what really has been this sort of instigator, this, something terrible has happened and now we need someone like Trump to come in and fix it. And well, the only thing I can think of is inflation, or sort of the result of basically the COVID inflation.
There's something else that's been going on also, and there's a number of ironies in all of this. So it is absolutely true that, of course, it's government policies, which nobody wants to admit, but there's absolutely true that there are forces that have been pushing down wages and pushing down employment, especially for jobs that are not what we'll call the exciting, glamorous ones. So if you are a artificial intelligence engineer, if you're a data center engineer, if you're a data scientist, if you're a mixed signal, you can do analog and digital signals on a chip designer. If you are an investment banker, there's certain professions that are the golden boys, make huge amounts of money. But if you are, a truck driver, if you're a factory worker, there's a lot of things that just don't fall into that category. And there's been enormous forces pushing down on, sort of on their heads, for decades. That is absolutely true. And the left gets the observation correct. The right tries to head the left off at the pass. The right knows where the left is going to go with this, so they try to deny the observation. Everything is better than it ever was because iPhones. Yes, it's true, we have the iPhones, but it's not necessarily true that the people working in factories for $21 an hour are getting a new iPhone every 2 years. However, they see other people getting new iPhones, and there's resentment that's building up. They don't understand the root causes of it. The defenders of this, including the capitalists, including, dare I say, a number of objectivists, don't understand the root causes of this. And so, we're arguing over whether the observation is correct. The observation is correct. There is absolutely forces pushing down. And if you take a look at, the Federal Reserve has a website called FRED, published by the St. Louis Fed. There's all kinds of great data series on there. You can look at graphs, including the number of people not counted in the workforce. And after, the crisis of 2001, you can see that really begins to rise. There's like 100 million people not counted in the workforce. The whole population of the country, including children and the elderly, and the people who are employed, is 350 million. 100 million of them are not counted because they don't have employment, but we don't want to call them unemployed. And that's a horrible, destructive, trend. It's destructive economically, it's destructive socially. These people feel marginalized, so they're angry. Okay, so now Trump, the populist, taps into the anger. It doesn't mean he's going to make anything better. It's going to make it worse. It's going to make their prices, when they go to Walmart or wherever they go to buy stuff, it's going to make prices go up. Because he's posturing as different from the status quo, it's going to be better. So the left, so we go from the observation to the diagnosis. What is the left's diagnosis? Capitalism. Well, that's absolutely wrong. We don't have capitalism. The right would say we do have capitalism and capitalism is great. So they're both wrong on well, sort of the left is wrong on the diagnosis, the right is wrong on thinking of capitalism. Again, even a lot of objectivists praise be capitalism. Every time there's a new iPhone or every time Amazon cuts the cost of Sunday delivery, look at how wonderful capitalism is. My little rant about this is that we have a welfare state so expensive and so massive that even high and progressive income taxes, which is Communist Manifesto plank number 2, is not sufficient to pay for it. And we have to have a central bank, which is Communist Manifesto plank number 5, to pay for it. Every productive enterprise is regulated. Many are actually actively supervised, like banks. Most professions are licensed. The government outright owns roads, railroads, harbors, airports, electric grids, water, sewer, the mail, radio spectrum, and schools, which is Communist Manifesto plank number 10. And we call this capitalism because it's not pure and perfect communism yet. Okay, it's not capitalism. And it has a central bank, and the central bank has had a falling interest rate for 40 odd years, which the conservative side loves, or at least the Wall Street conservatives love, and a lot of the free marketers and the objectivists love, because it means rising stock prices and rising asset prices. So everyone feels like they're getting rich, which is an illusion of wealth. But anyway, so the observation is in dispute, the diagnosis is in dispute, and of course, what is the left's prescription? We need a tax on wealth, we need a tax on inheritance. We can't allow anybody to accumulate capital. It's capital that they want to attack. And the right says, well, we shouldn't tax wealth, and the right is correct on that. But the argument's fallen apart because we don't even agree on the observation or the diagnosis or anything else. So now we come to tariffs, and the right has now adopted the left's posture and says, what a terrible shame it is that we've marginalized all these working people. Wait a minute, that's the thing you've been denying, that the left has been saying for decades. Now you suddenly flipped, and now you accept it. Okay, fair enough. Yes, the working people have been marginalized. That's true. And you think you're going to fix it by tariffing us. That's only going to make it worse. How many people work in steel mills, which are now going to be protected by tariffs, versus how many people work in factories or in industries that rely on steel? Let's say manufacturing appliances or manufacturing cars or manufacturing so many other things. You are going to make, a million people worse off to protect one who works in steel. So it's economically based on a wrongful idea, and obviously its notion of individual rights is complete, the opposite.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of this. The stock prices are rising, or we're prospering. It's booming. It sort of reminds me of Donald Trump's first term, but also generally pretty much all of 2010s until the very end, where we had one of the biggest sort of the rise of stock prices and the so-called boom. And whenever I hear about it, or recently when I started thinking about it more, especially with the fact that interest rates are sort of this idea of across the board. They are not decided by the market. They are decided by somebody in the Fed, by some guidelines. This idea of when it comes to this idea of credit or this idea of borrowing money, I think ideally it would always sort of fuel productive industry, something that is productive, right? You do not want money going something somewhere just because, which is something the remnants of Keynes are arguing for. You're in a recession, you just need to spend. You just need to spend money until we get out of recession. But when it's not going into anything productive, and sort of going back to Donald Trump 1, where he increasingly spent, and when government spends, GDP does increase, right? But what happens when that increasingly that is not going to productive business, when that is the whole system is basically built upon, well, let's just have booms, let's just try to spend money whenever we can, because right now there is cheap money that we can throw all around.
Two things. One is, yes, you're absolutely right. Borrowing in order to consume is a destructive thing, because the consumption is one and done, and then the debt overhang lasts forever. So we have $36 trillion of that debt overhang. How much of that finance something productive, and how much of that finance welfare? Whether corporate or individual or not, sovereign welfare, we dole out to other countries. I don't think there's any statistic on that. As far as the stock market going up, a lot of people, especially Trump defenders, in his first term said he made the stock market go up, therefore the economy went up. If you do something economically destructive that harms businesses, the harm is not uniformly distributed. The harm tends to hit smaller firms harder than bigger firms. And that's number one. And number two, if anybody's lobbying to get special exemptions, so there were 17,000 applications for exemptions from tariffs in Trump's first administration. The firms most likely to get those exemptions, of course, are the big firms. So when we say the stock market, we either mean the 30 big cronies in the Dow, or we mean the 500 biggest crony corporations in the S&P 500. The fact that their stocks are going up doesn't necessarily mean the economy's going well. It could very well mean that we've harmed their competitors more than we've harmed them, and they're getting more. The market is overall shrinking. We're getting poorer, but their share of that shrinking market is increasing faster than the market has been shrunk. So think of, let's say there are two firms that have a factory in China that's now rendered essentially worthless, and now you have to build a factory in America. One's a smaller firm that really only has a certain amount of balance sheet that they can put to work, and the other is a major corporation that has a much, much, much bigger balance sheet. Now you have to write off the value of the Chinese factory. The smaller firm could be rendered insolvent by this write-off, or if they're not insolvent, they may be so close they can't get credit to build a factory in the US. The major crony corporation can get the credit to build the factory in the US. So after the tariff, the smaller firm is now basically out of the market, and the bigger firm, life goes on, and yes, the labor costs are higher, but they built the factory in the US and life goes on. So their share price could go up. And it's not wrong that the share price goes up because they're going to make more money in it, but that shouldn't be treated as evidence that Trump's policy was good. To the contrary, it benefited the crony at the expense of everyone else, and of course the customer as well.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. Super chat from Robert. Thanks, or rather, he's been a member for 35 months. Thank you so much. He says, there is a reason why Trump's motto is Make America Great Again, not Free Again. Trump's idea of greatness is not a free country. It's Trumpistan. And I want to go to you on that. But yeah, it is something that I've noticed is that there is no idea of speaking about the individual. There is no, individuals should pursue what is right for their life. There is this, well, America will be great. And if it means we have to suffer with, higher prices or worse economy, if there is this mythical America in the future that will achieve by doing this, then we should sort of go for it. And, the stark difference with, the founding fathers or anybody really is, they didn't have some idea of great country as an end in itself. They wanted a system that would work for the individual, that would protect individual to sort of do what is right for their course of action. And as a result, of course, you have the greatest nation in the world, which right now we look at other nations and we say, well, they do something that hurts us, so we should ignore the fact that we have been the greatest country and we should emulate them. Keith, what do you make of this whole way of thinking?
If you visit the countries that have these kinds of policies, national industrial policy, of which tariffs is only a component, and including tariffs, the internal economies are chaotic, supply chains are disrupted, and the net result is, yes, things are, too expensive for the average citizen to afford, but they're also just not available. Even if you're an American and you're wealthy and you're there and you can afford whatever you want, it's shocking sometimes to find what's not available or not available today because things are intermittent, because the supply chain is constantly being abused and hammered and so on. So, my dissertation, I think the most important thing that I address, I have several topics I talk about, is the idea of government intrusion into the economy And it's always promised that's going to do some sort of good. It's always going to improve the outcome. That's the promise. Otherwise, people wouldn't vote for it. But every different kind of instance, and I covered a dozen different kinds of things the government could do, always reduce it. So in the economy, there are people that are trying to produce, right? That's what we as human beings do. That's what Ayn Rand wrote about, right? As we work to produce the values that we need, that they're not automatic. We're not a tree that just extends to the sun and the air and the rain, right? We have to work to produce what we need. And to do that more effectively, we coordinate our activities with others. We're not 7.5 billion people on this planet all independently subsisting. We all go down to the riverbank and reach with our hands into the water to grab a fish when we're hungry. We coordinate. And we're all specialists, and we have division of labor. And Adam Smith wrote about this, 250 years ago. And every time the government intrudes, it reduces the ability to coordinate. And the net result is you have this divide. And on this side, you have people that want to be customers, but can't obtain what they want. And on this side, you have people that want to produce and sell the goods that the customers want, but they can't. And it's the government that's holding them apart by means of a tariff or a subsidy or a regulation or whatever. There's all these different things that governments do. And that's what tariffs are. So if you look at the countries that have this kind of stuff, and if they do it consistently across the whole board, not just tariffs, then internally you see that the people are impoverished. You see real dirt grinding for, poverty of a kind that we don't generally, have in the US or even in the UK, which is poorer than the US because it has more government intrusion. You don't have that here, but in places like India, places like, Turkey, places like Southeast Asia, you have this, and, it's chaotic, and things are available, then they're not, then they are, then they're not, and people have to deal with this, whether it's intermittent power. So in India, I'm told that what expats do is, first of all, you have to get a generator, but then the water supply is intermittent. So when the water's running, you fill up the bathtubs and the sinks, so you have water, because it could turn off at any minute. So this idea that something's available and then it's not available, then maybe it is again and then it's not. It's kind of the chaos where, coordination has been reduced to the level of a post-apocalyptic, fantasy novel where something is and it isn't. And, when you see it, you have to jump on it, you have to trade, you have to, there's this frenetic, compensation, right? People, in the Soviet Union, when there was a rumor that a store had bread, there'd be a line, 2 kilometers long outside the store. Because normally they didn't have bread. And it's that kind of frenetic activity, that massive wasting of time and energy that could be productive going into waiting on lines and doing all these things, is what comes of a tariff policy. It's all bad. There is no good upside to it.
Yeah, and just to bring sort of personal examples, I live in Slovakia, so I know stories from my parents and grandparents and older people about how they used to live under like actual communism. And Czechoslovakia was one of the sort of most liberal communist nations on that. But my sort of unique thing is that I now I have this association with tangerines and the fact with Christmas, because it's not a Christmas fruit, but the only time you could get tangerines in communist regimes was specifically on Christmas, when there was some specific specific imports, or they could come, or the state decided they would give it, so you had to wait. And so now I have this connection of those two things. And as well as you mentioned about this idea that things are just not available. In Czechoslovakia, we also had these American import stores. Basically, there were stores where they actually had like American products or products from the West, but you could only pay with dollars. And people would spend all of their money to buy dollars at like extraordinary rates, because that was the only place where you could actually buy, one, quality products, and two, products that actually you can use, or that are actually good. People really do, people who have, and I haven't lived in communist regime, but just from what people told me about, but people really do not realize what world is like when you don't have access to basic things. And that is something that the more government intervenes, that is something that we are getting closer to. It's important to remember that we as humans, as individuals, to sort of live, we need to plan for the future. We need to be able to project for the future what we want to do, what we want from our life, what we want to do. And as you mentioned, if you cannot rely that your water will run or your electricity will run when you need access to pretty much anything, uh, how can you plan for the future? You automatically just go to the next day. As long as and that is the sort of post-apocalyptic scenario, right? As long as I can survive the next day, that's the top of life. And you cannot have a successful nation when people just think one day ahead.
No, and it also destroys morality or ethics. If all of life is one ongoing emergency, if everyday life really is being in a lifeboat, to use Ayn Rand's analogy, people do not treat their fellow man very well, in communist regimes or in third world dictatorships of any kind, because life is reduced to it's nasty, brutish, and short, in these kinds of places. And right, you don't know if you're going to have food tomorrow. There's all kinds of things you don't know. So, we're taking, anyways, with tariffs, we're taking a step closer to that. Now, one tariff step right now isn't going to turn the United States into Czechoslovakia, let alone the Soviet Union. There's a lot of other steps necessary to do it, but step by step, we're marching there. And, we'll see if there's resistance to this. And I think, something Ayn Rand said gives me a little bit of hope for this, which is she said, in Europe, the instinctive reaction that people have to authority from the government, to knuckle the forehead and bow. And the American reaction is to say, I'm not going to say the words, but that goes with that. When, goods start to become unavailable and prices go up, there's going to be an angry backlash against this. Maybe people demand that we eliminate these tariffs. The problem is a lot of damage is done. Companies have started, they wrote off their factories in China, that laid off the people. They start to, waste money building in the US. And also there's a trust issue. Okay, if the tariffs are reversed, how do they know it won't be reversed again? So, you've opened a door to something. It's very hard to get the genie back in the bottle after you do that. But I don't know more than anybody else where this is all going. This is bad juju, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, one recommendation I would give to people, which maybe we'll see even more of this, especially with Trump's rhetoric, is I think this was Ford Hall Forum speech by Ayn Rand, the moratorium on brains, which specifically talked about Richard Nixon's price controls. And hopefully we are not on our way to price controls. But as I've said, Trump already said, car manufacturers, you better not raise the prices. You better not actually think about raising prices. And so this really is not, far away from that. We also have a super chat from Alexei. Thank you so much. He's asking you actually, Keith, what would be the impact of tariffs you would expect in the precious metals market?
In a certain sense, there shouldn't be. I mean, I don't expect they're going to tax gold and silver. If they do, then that will probably destroy the futures market in New York. There has been a big inrush of metal into the U.S. because the big trade, the carry trade that people put on is they buy spot metal and they sell a futures contract against it and they make a spread called the basis. Spot means London, futures means New York. If there's a risk of tariffs, slamming down to import that bar from London to New York, you have to get the bar in before the tariff hits. And so there's been a lot of gold imported, for that reason. But, psychologically, this whole tariff thing is one more blow against the perception of America as the economic powerhouse. It's one more blow against the dollar, ultimately, which is used for all this global trade. And it makes people think about risks in a different way than before. It increases the default risk, right? So to own a dollar is to be a creditor. And if there are defaults that are cascading around, It's not necessarily, you don't want to be a debtor that's forced to default, but you don't want to be a creditor either. So, if you own gold, you own something that isn't a banking system liability. So it makes people think about gold, and obviously, we're in one heck of a gold bull market, which of course is really a bear market in the dollar. So people say, oh, gold broke the psychological barrier of $3,000 an ounce. True, but I say economic value should be measured objectively, which is in gold. And so earlier this week, the dollar broke down below 10 milligrams of gold per dollar. So when the Fed was created in 1913, it was 1,500 milligrams was a dollar. It's now broken below 10, which is, a really bleak, depressing thing if you think about how much they've destroyed the value of what used to be the best currency in the world. So I don't know if I answered the question or not, but
Well, what would the question was, what would be the impact? And
it's probably bullish, but I'd call it a secondary or tertiary effect. It's not a primary driver for buying, but it makes people think more about gold than perhaps they might have.
yeah, although whenever I think of, when people say, oh, you should buy gold because, it's like rising now, or you should buy it earlier, so because it's rising. And that is really sort of, whenever I think of that, it is sort of like a flawed thinking of gold. And because exactly, as you mentioned, it is the only sort of like actual money. And you don't think of money as something, okay, I'll buy it now and I'll sell it later for more. Well, that's not money. That's just some kind of a speculation. Money is money because you hold it, you use it. You don't wanna like, especially sell it for something that is worse than that. I mean, the idea that you would again sell gold for a dollar is, yeah, simply you just wanna sort of like consume your savings.
But very near and dear to my heart, right? We buy money, wait for the money to go up, and then sell the money in exchange for what, non-money. But in this world, and I'm going to mention my company very briefly. The only thing you really get, you buy the gold and then you want it to go up. So you start out buying gold for all the reasons of hedge and insurance and dollar debasement, inflation, and all these things, right? Then once you buy the gold, then it's like, oh, baby needs a new pair of shoes. Come on, it becomes a chip in the casino. But the only way to profit from your gold is to sell it, which is why I created monetary metals. We pay interest on gold so you can actually keep your gold and make a profit on it, rather than the way to make the profit is to sell the gold, which economically is very important and does a lot of interesting things in terms of bringing gold back in the monetary system. But just conceptually or psychologically, you're holding the gold and you're making money on your gold versus you buy the gold, you hold it, and then you sell the gold, and that's the only way to make money on it. It's a very perverse. You're really onto something. It's inverted from what it should be. And ultimately it's destructive, although that's a whole other thesis and a whole other, I gave a talk on yield purchasing power for anybody interested in that. Google that. It was a keynote at American Institute for Economic Research, AIER, on yield purchasing power, and this idea that you buy an asset and it goes up and you sell it, and that's really a process of capital consumption of societies liquidate and become poorer, which is the Keynesian ideal. But anyways, that's a whole other.
Yeah, just one more point of that, because I started getting into sort of investing or trying to understand it about a year ago. And yeah, then the sort of general idea you see pretty much everywhere when it comes to investments, is you buy some ETF and then you hold it for some time and then you sort of sell it. And sort of the goal is straight up or that's what's thought of as investment. And for a long time, it really rubbed me the wrong way, and I just couldn't explain why. But I think this idea that investment is something you sort of you buy something and then you sell it to somebody else for something different. I think there is some like wrong thinking in there, and I'm wondering what you think, because when I think of or when I'm trying to think of investments, I think like something like dividends, and the idea that we don't need dividends, we just need the capital accumulation and then we'll sell it off. But this idea that investment doesn't give you return in the actual thing, or something, it doesn't have like an actual output. Like, if something is productive, then it's producing something, right? So there should be a ability to extract that production without selling the thing itself.
You're very perceptive. And I make a distinction between investment versus speculation. Most people think, well, speculation is a risky investment. It's nothing to do with risk. In an investment, you are financing a productive activity, and the profit that you make as the investor comes from part of the increase in production that you help finance. Right? So, you give a company money, they buy a machine tool, they can stamp out widgets, they sell the widgets, make money. And what you get paid as the investor is part of the money they make from making the widgets. In speculation, you buy this thing, you're financing nothing, you wait a while, and then you sell it to someone else for a higher price, hopefully, but it could be a lower price. If the price is higher, your profit, your gain comes from what? From the savings or from the wealth of the next speculator. So speculation, especially in an endless bull market fueled by a central bank, speculation is a process of conversion. Now, conversion, anybody who's a lawyer in the audience will know, conversion has legal meaning as like an illicit taking of a property. Speculation is the process of conversion of one party's wealth into another party's income. People don't spend their wealth, but they spend their income. So let's say I have, $80,000 of life savings, and I buy a Bitcoin. I give my $80,000 to someone who's exiting the Bitcoin speculation. And I don't know whether that represents a profit to him or just recovery of his capital, but I don't care. I give up $80,000 of my life savings to a Bitcoin guy, and then assuming I'm right, and next week Bitcoin's $100,000, I sell Bitcoin to the next guy. He forks over $100,000 of his life savings. I take my 80,000 back out. That's my capital. Maybe I increase my capital by 5,000. So now my investable capital is 85,000, and I have 15,000 as my profit that I'm going to spend. I'm going to consume. So what am I doing? I'm consuming $15,000 that guy wouldn't have consumed. To him, that was his life savings. To me, it's a profit. I consumed my profit, and society and the aggregate balance sheet is impoverished now by $15,000 of capital consumption. Now that guy did it because he expects Bitcoin to go to $200,000, and the next guy's going to fork over even more of his life savings than this guy forked over to me, and so he'll take his 100,000 back plus 20,000 will add to his capital, and he'll consume 80,000. And every time it goes up, you get more and more and more consumption. Until finally it hits the top, and then when the price comes down, everyone says that's when the moment of destruction occurs. No. The moments of destruction, every time it goes up and every time it changes hands, every time someone's consuming without having produced, because of the illusion that's called the wealth effect, the illusion of getting rich, betting on an asset price. So that the central banks have distorted the concept of investing beyond all recognition. Where investing today means going into the Fed's casino, and everyone has their preferred chip, whether it's gold, whether it's crypto, whether it's stocks, antique Ferraris, Pablo Picasso paintings, whatever, right? You go into the casino with your favorite chip, you put your chips down, you spin the wheel, roll the bones, right? And then hopefully more chips come back to you. And as long as the Fed does their job, as people perceive it, of managing the falling interest rate, asset prices are a strict mathematical inverse. It's a seesaw. Interest rates coming down, asset prices going up. As long as the interest rate is falling, everyone's happy that they're getting richer, or so they believe. And it's not actually real riches, it's the wealth effect. I liken it to, I don't know how many of your audience are Americans versus Europeans and British. America, we have a lot of great food, but our cheese is not generally among it. And so we have something that we call pasteurized processed American cheese food. It's not really cheese. It comes out of a chemical plant of some sort. There's some dairy involved in it, and a lot of non-dairy things are added to it, and it has an orange color and comes in individually wrapped slices. It's not what Europeans would recognize as cheese. Well, the wealth effect is to wealth what pasteurized processed American cheese food, like think of Velveeta, as that is the cheese, which is to say, sort of almost kind of looks like it. but it has a taste reminiscent of it in a way, if you understand what you're getting, but it isn't the same product at all. That's what they give us.
Yeah, and also that exactly reminds me of there was a recent article that came out, trying to remember who published it, on Ayn Rand, but it was sort of like a typical smear. But one of the sort of critiques of Ayn Rand was that she didn't invest. That, this like capitalist, and she didn't put her money in the stock market, despite the fact that everybody sort of understands it's good. But even this idea that sort of everybody should invest is the result of the corruption of money. The idea that, you having a dollar or you keeping a dollar is like the worst thing you could happen, because somebody decided that, this has to be destroyed. We have to destroy this $1 in favor of something else. So yeah, even this idea that everybody should invest pretty much just means, we are destroying your money, so you better make sure you are somewhere else that money is being spent.
Yeah, hold it long term. I was gonna say that, I mean, I don't know whether Ayn Rand invested or didn't invest. I haven't read anything about that, but it seems like there's a very simple equivocation on the word capitalist. Capitalist can mean an advocate of capitalism, which Ayn Rand certainly was. And capitalist can also mean a very specific role in a free market. And that's the person who puts up the capital, to finance, especially in the early stages, the equity capital to finance, new enterprises. And that's a specialty role. And your point is a very good one, that, in a system of honest money, most people really are not any good at that job. And that's also true today. But in a system of honest money, the difference is they realize they're not any good at it. And today, everyone imagines themselves to be an expert, because as long as the interest rates are falling, everything goes up, and everyone confuses falling interest rate with smart investing. But it's a specialty role, and most people wouldn't do it because they're risk of losses. And of course, in a laissez-faire capitalist system, you don't have bailouts. You don't have the Fed saying, "Oh, we have a recession, let's print more money." You don't have any of these things. So if you make a bad bet, if you put money into, I'll just take an example of Theranos, based on a wrong premise, you lose your money. That's it. So you go from having $1 million to being broke. Congratulations. And most people don't want to do that. So, but of course, in an honest money system, they can deposit their money in a bank and earn, a fixed interest rate on it, which is enough that, when they retire, they can live in retirement at the same level of quality of life as they had when they were working. And that was always the goal historically, right? Is how much do you have to set aside and what interest rate? So when you hit 65, you can quit working and keep the same quality of life. By that point, your house is paid off, you don't have a mortgage anymore, your kids are out of the house, you're not supporting kids, you're not paying for their college. And now you don't need quite as much income, you need about 2/3. And on 2/3 the income, you maintain the same, you can go on vacations, you can buy a new car every once in a while, you can go out to restaurants, watch the movies, buy new clothing, do all the things you do, without having to bet and speculate and pick winners and losers and do all these things, which are hard and require specialists. And you're right, we've completely lost, sight of that, and everyone thinks they're an investor. And it will end in tears, in the end, for most people.
Yeah, one Slovak economist I really like. He always talks about there is this like folk story in Slovak. It's called three coins, and it's this idea that when for every three coins you make, you keep one for yourself, one for your kids, and one for your parents to like take care of them. And the moral is that, or sort of the idea is that you when you make money, you keep it, and you can borrow, you can put underground your coin that you make today, and purchase relatively the same, or ideally even more in the future. And that is something that is simply not possible today, and the distortions from that ripple through all of economy. So that's why I think it's Yeah, it's so important to like really make the case that today, while I guess we are still technically in sort of the more free market aspects of it, but I think having something as important as interest rates handled completely by the government is, I think, one of the most destructive things for the economy.
The Soviets thought they could centrally plan the production of wheat, corn. And so they took one of the most fertile areas in the world, in part of Russia and obviously Ukraine, and centrally planned it. Now, wheat is a very simple thing. It is an annual cycle. You basically need the right soil, which is already proven because it had been fertile for thousands of years. You need rain and sun, which was already proven for thousands of years. You put the seeds in the ground. For the most part, you wait, maybe pick out a few weeds, and then you harvest it. And with their central planning, it is an annual cycle. And with their central planning, they starved tens of millions of people. So today, every economist on both sides of the aisle knows that central planning of wheat is stupid and foolish and is going to result in starvation. But instead, we think that we can centrally plan credit, which is the most complicated thing by far, right? It's 10 to the 57 times more complicated than wheat. It has a cycle that even its proponents admit could be years or decades. Even Ocon invites George Selgin to say that you can have a free banking system, as he calls it, built on top of fiat money and central bank. So this argument is completely ubiquitous, completely mainstream, left, right, and center. Even libertarians, even some objectivists are comfortable with this idea that, of course, you have a central bank and, they do something with interest rates, something, magic, whatever, they don't really understand it. And it's insane, right? It takes a market to figure out what the cost of credit should be. And the market will take into account all the factors that the central planners don't know about and wouldn't know how to factor in anyway. And when the market sets a price, it does it in a different mechanism that has different consequences than when a central planner does it. So even if the central planner got it right, which is never, and even if the right price was a static quantity that never moved, which is never, it's always moving, even if the central planner somehow managed to get it right, he doesn't get the right consequences and side effects because of the way he did it versus the way a market would do it. And this belief today is pervasive and ubiquitous. There's essentially nobody other than a tiny little ragtag band of us that would say that the interest rate should be set, completely in a free market. And which is what Monetary Metals is doing. I mean, nobody's obligated to deposit their gold. If they do deposit their gold, they're not obligated to put it in any particular deal we present either. So they only do it if they like the interest rate. And that's the first time that a free market, uncoerced, unnudged by a central banker, has set an interest rate, to my knowledge, since 1912, before the Fed was created. But
Yeah.
that's, a whole other thing. I've got to run. I just said to Razzie I could be on for a few minutes.
Oh, yeah. Sorry for that.
My work day here, so I apologize. But thanks for having me on. Hopefully I added value and look forward to doing it again. Oh, and I think I'm speaking at the event on the Lehman Tavern on Wednesday. I'll be in London.
Yeah, that should be next week. We are still figuring out how that's exactly going to happen. But if it does happen, we should definitely live stream it. So I still have a few super chats to read. So if you wanna leave already, I'm gonna go for a bit longer. It's just if you have to leave already.
Yeah, I do have to leave. I apologize. But thank you.
Okay, no worries. Thank you for joining me today. So yeah, this was great for Keith to join. Also, he joined for much longer than he said he would. So thank very much to him. We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, time and time again, I see Trumpists answer economic objection with taunts, deflections, and expressions of blind and absolute faith in the Donald. Yeah, that is something I've definitely seen, is this sort of, just trust him. Trump knows what he's doing. Trump has an implicit understanding of economy, of the market, so he can do the right thing. He can do what is necessary, and that is truly scary place to be in, when it's no longer about even proving, we take these steps and then we achieve this. It's no. Just trust this guy. This guy knows what the right thing is, and he will achieve what needs to be done. We also have a super chat from Tom, who has been a member for 33 months. Thank you so much. He says, the GOP helped pass the Sherman Act, and Hoover helped save the USSR from famine. The GOP sacrificing to make America pure in its collectivism. And yeah, I mean, that is definitely something that is happening, and that fills me with that really makes me scared about what will I think I have one more video that I wanted to play. Oh yeah, and I definitely want to play it here, so let's listen.
It looks, obviously that's the president's ambitious agenda, but on the argument of short-term pain, long-term gain, which seems what you're arguing about the long-term, what this will look like, prices will go up for Americans in the short term, right?
They could. They don't have to.
And that's, if they don't have to, you're arguing if businesses do not pass those on to those consumers.
Well, in the President Trump's first administration, prices didn't go up, so the businesses don't have to pass them on, or the producers in the other countries can eat the tariffs, and traditionally the dollar adjusts. So it's a very complicated calculus to see where we end up.
Yeah, and of course, these are much broader than the ones in the first term. The president was making the argument in the Rose Garden about what economists predicted then and what this looks like.
And when you listen to this, how can we ever hope Republicans to stand up to Democrats? Many of us probably agree that Democrats are absolutely worse than Republicans. But when Republicans start saying, oh no, the taxes, no, they won't be passed out to consumers. No, these tariffs, no. The companies will eat up the cost. I mean, come on, what's wrong with tariffs? What's wrong with increasing taxes? That won't be passed on to consumers. What can they ever say when Democrats do the same thing? What can they say when Democrats tries to raise taxes, or tries to, I mean, even with these tariffs, decide to keep these tariffs in place, decide to not get rid of them? What would the Republicans say then? We do not want, I mean, you put them in place. When they will want to increase taxes, what will be the response be? This will be passed on to consumers? I mean, you said it might not be. What is really disappearing from America is any sort of opposition, any sort of hope that there will be better. And in some ways, it almost doesn't matter which party is in the White House. They are both collectivistic. They both want more statism, and they do not really care anymore. They do not care for liberty. They do not care for individual rights, which is also that's the important fact. The idea is that an American wants to trade with a German, or with someone from Japan, or with someone from Canada, or with someone from Mexico, with someone from the British Indian territories, whoever you want to take. And the government comes in and says, okay, you can trade, but you have to pay him 10% more than he's asking for. Or you have to pay him 20%, 60%, 80% more than what he's asking for. How is that just? How is that right? How is that good for the individual? How is that good for the liberty in the world when you start justifying things like this? This episode is going for much longer than I thought. I want to go through, maybe just take last 5 or 10 minutes or so and go through some of the defense I've seen. So some Republicans have been saying, oh, come on, we can use these tariffs and we can replace income tax with these tariffs. I mean, as we did in 1913 or pre-1913, before the federal income tax. And that idea is simply crazy. Or rather, not necessarily crazy, but currently in 2024, 23% of GDP was government spending. In like 1900, it was 2.7%, almost like 9 times lower or 10 times lower, specifically federal spending. Trump is not planning to lower spending, and even then, when we talk about going from 23% to 2.7%, that's gutting all of Social Security. That's gutting all of Medicare and Medicaid. That's gutting pretty much every program. I mean, 2.7%. America is spending on military 3%. So this is 2.7% would not even be enough to cover the military spending America is doing right now. And not to mention, America still has debt to pay. The idea that we would decrease spending without doing anything about the debt. I mean, that has to, I mean, I don't know if 2.7% would even be enough to cover the interest rate or the interest that we are paying on that America is paying on the debt. That I think it is. I think it is a trillion. I think about $1 trillion annually go to the debt. Not towards the debt, towards the interest rate on the debt. So until something more, something bigger, something larger is planned, there won't be any change. There won't be any meaningful change. This will simply really destroy the American economy as we know it. Now, I've also seen sort of this idea like other countries have tariffs. We've talked about this, the idea that you would shoot yourself because somebody is shooting themselves in the foot. Again, it's America should be free first and foremost. It shouldn't be as oppressive as other nations. It should always be the shining city on the hill or whatever, shining beacon of liberty and of freedom. And some people have been saying that, or that this might result, because something that we might see is Trump sort of getting some investment deals or getting some, even some trade deals from this. But for those who praise this, that's simply, you want a bully in the White House. You want, when it comes to investment deals, you do want a fascist in the White House. That's what you're saying. You want somebody who uses the force of the government to force people into taking certain actions, to force people into taking certain kind of steps. And that is not the kind of president I think anybody should want. With that, this episode went on way longer than I was expecting. We have also super chat from Wes. Thank you so much. I'll just read. Bonnie in the chat says, "Eat up the cost and fail," from Atlas Shrugged. "Don't worry, you'll think of something. You'll make our statism work for us just by trying a little harder." I mean, that is that sort of attitude. And back in the 60s or 70s, Ayn Rand said choosing the lesser of evil no longer applies. 50 years ago, it's time to see that sides are equally evil. I think, yeah, for some time, it's clear that America is in a bad place when it comes to both sides. I think still sort of going out and voting is important, but arguing that there is a different kind of world we want. There is an America we forgot that we want to bring back, and we do not want, and neither Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or anybody who decides to come out will not bring that kind of America back. Only individual Americans who still preserve that way of life, that view of life, that sort of, and I'm forgetting the term people use for that. It's only those kind of Americans that can really bring it back. With that, thank you everybody for watching today. Thank you also Keith Weiner for joining us today. It was really great. With that, we'll see you tomorrow.